Stuart Holbrook has spent his life in the world of collectors. As president of Theriault, the world's leader in the auction of antique dolls and figurative art for over 30 years, he's managed the often personal and always wild world of collecting and collectors. His market expertise and knowledge of trends comes to life in The Curious Collector, where he shares his experience and experiences in real-life stories, alongside sage advice on how to build great collections within the happy life of a collector.
Welcome back to The Curious Collector. I'm Stuart Holbrook with you for episode 34, and it's a great one with a multitude of different topics, all centering around the concept of contemporary doll art. And we'll help define that a little bit more as we get into this interview with one of the legends of contemporary doll artistry, and that is Stephanie Blythe, who's going to talk to us about her work and her origins in this community, the movement itself, as well about the organization NIADA, which was developed, I believe, in 1963, originated out of some well-known names that we'll talk about, and how it is working to preserve the legacy and work of artists from the past and encouraging new artists for the future. So leading into the secondary part of the conversation with her, and that is a discussion of the great patron of contemporary doll art, and that's the celebrity Richard Simmons, who many of you may recognize that name. And if you don't, especially our overseas listeners, you may not. We will get into a little bit of the background of him and how he really does define a lot of pop culture, let's call it, of the 1980s and 90s here in America. Oh, of course, I've got to update you with my location. I'm currently coming to you, broadcasting this podcast from Vienna, Austria, where I have been working both in Austria and Germany over the past few days with a few collectors and collections, and moving on to London in the UK, where I will appear on Tuesday at the Doll Collectors Club of Great Britain, a storied, old, established major club here in Europe, and I'll be a guest speaker at their annual Christmas event. Really looking forward to that, and a few more people to see there at that time, and then flying back home for a big auction event and wrapping up the year, wrapping up table talks, as you've been hearing me discuss all my locations around the country, around the world this past year, doing lectures, 2 doll clubs, and one more to go after London, and that's in Pensacola, Florida, and that will end the entire circuit. And later on in the year, I'll give you some updates as to my thoughts in a podcast as to this tour, my feelings about collecting, and I think I want to call it My America Through the Eyes of Collectors, because it's a really beautiful story, and I think it will add to some of the narrative that we've been discussing over the past year on this podcast, which has really paralleled this tour as well. And I hope to share with you some introspective thoughts on this tour and what I'm seeing in the beautiful story of collectors that I witnessed across America. Stephanie, welcome. Stephanie Blythe, I'm so happy to have you here with us today in The Curious Collector. You are truly an icon in the world of contemporary art dolls, and you and I have known each other for 36 years. Can you believe this? And I've seen a lot of the development of your work over these years, and it's been an honor to know you personally, which is why I wanted to talk to you about the contemporary art doll movement. And because I know you personally, I'm comfortable with you, and I think you're such a cool person. So welcome, Stephanie. Glad to have you here with us today.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you.
So I think we'll get into a little bit about you and your rich history in this subject, but I think for a lot of listeners out there who may not be as tuned in, dialed into these genres that we just throw out normally in our everyday conversations, they may not be familiar with what the term contemporary doll art actually signifies. What is this genre? What is this category? Help some of our listeners out there understand it.
Well, I think we're all still trying to figure that out, too, because we don't really fall into a lot of categories. You know, we would like contemporary doll art to be recognized as an art form. That was the whole reason that NIADA was founded. I don't know that a lot of people realize that not only are doll artists sculptors, but they're also hairdressers, and they're costume designers, and they're painters. You know, making an art doll requires a lot of different skills, not just one skill set. And I think that art dolls has broadened. You know, a doll used to be considered a plaything. plaything. The antiques that Theriault sells are no longer playthings. They're adult collectibles now and worth a lot of money.
A lot of the subjects you just touched on, I think we'll get into that will help define it. But it leads to being, I think, the definition of a plaything versus an object that is made for a collector specifically.
Yes.
And I think that may be where we'll dive into this a little bit more later on as we discuss NIADA and discuss the origins of it and how it's led to the contemporary version of NIADA today. So tell us a little bit about you, and maybe that will help, I think, to define for people contemporary doll art and how you got into this and developed over the years quite a following around the world. Now, one of the things you're very, very well known for are your teacup fairies, but you did other pieces as well, all of them three-dimensional. Can you tell us your background?
My background is that after high school, I went to the Philadelphia College of Art because I wanted to be a children's book illustrator, but I soon realized that that wasn't working for me. So I became a textile artist. And after I graduated from college, I worked for Vera sheets and scarves, and I'm sure some of you are familiar with that. And eventually found myself having 2 children and living in rural Maryland in Harford County and doing anything to make money that had to do with art. I mean, I was art director of a printing company, and I helped create a magazine for Harford County. And I eventually met Susan Snodgrass, who became my business partner for 16 years, and she had been into dolls, miniatures, and I helped her create a miniature room for a decorator showcase. And together we started a business that exploded. So I had always collected antique lace and antique textiles and things like that, and I discovered that, hey, here's a way to create with these things and feed my passion for these antique textiles. And so eventually we developed this business.
It's very interesting that I think textiles interjects a lot with doll art. We talk about everything being the doll and the figure itself, but the textiles and clothing are, as we see throughout doll history, are equally important. And a lot of people with interest in textiles and fashion design become doll artists as well, as they are the perfect mannequin, the perfect form in which to show that side of your creativity. Really interesting. Wait, did you say you worked for Vera Scarves?
Yeah.
That was the designer that did scarves. All the women from the 30s on had them.
Right. Yeah. She hand painted all these scarves, and then she eventually sold sheets, and I was one of her designers, which was quite an interesting experience.
I wonder if it's the same company, because I recently had Anne Ryan, who's the daughter of Jack Ryan, the creator of Barbie, and her mother, just before he started working for Mattel and designed the Barbie, she worked for Vera, I thought the same company. She mentioned and talked about this. So an interesting connection there as well.
Yeah.
A lot of the contemporary doll artists, I think it's important to understand, you were not just going to doll shows and setting up your dolls and selling them.
I was not involved in the doll world in the beginning. Susan and I started doing miniature dolls. That's what we focused on for quite a while. I have a master's degree in psychology, and one of the things that I had to do for my master's degree was to demonstrate mastery over something. So you had to take something in your life and make it a project. And my ex-husband always used to call my doll making an expensive hobby. So I decided to take my, quote, expensive hobby, unquote, and turn it into a real business. So each month I had to log in what I did. And one of the things was to approach galleries and shops and begin wholesaling our dolls. At the end of that project, I had more than quadrupled our income.
And you were, I know, featured in a number of art galleries rather than doll shops.
In fact, Pendragon Gallery in Annapolis was the first gallery that ever showed our work.
Right in our backyard. Yeah, that's great.
Yep.
And I think that's something that's probably a more common thing that you will find with contemporary doll artists, is that they are not just at doll events, that they are actually, many of them, displaying their pieces at art galleries around the world. Yes. And that is one of the things I think that distinguishes it from the traditional doll world. But when I introduced you earlier, I mentioned how you, in this evolution of your creations, you started meeting a lot of characters in different areas of the doll world, let's call it. And you very much now have your feet in both worlds of contemporary doll artistry, but you also know a lot of vintage and antique doll collectors. And you have, I think, intersected both of those worlds yourself in who you sell to, and you have a lot of antique doll collectors who love your work.
Yeah, I was very fortunate because I lived in Maryland, Gaithersburg, which is a very big, mainly antique doll show. That was one of the first doll shows I ever did, was Gaithersburg, and that was pretty amazing. Susan and I also did the American Craft Council show in Baltimore.
Major craft show, yeah.
Yeah, we did that for many years. We put our feet in a lot of doorways there.
You did. And I think a lot of contemporary doll artists, not a lot, but a good portion of them, I find that they are pretty much in that world. But you're one of the doll artists that really did cross over and became connected to the collectors of the antiques and vintage. And I think that's a very unique part of your work as well. And I'm sure has influenced some of the things that you've done in the past, and that you understand both worlds. So you have been a longtime member of NIADA. And this is an organization that, just a little background, has been around since 1963, which coincidentally is the year I was born, and founded by a number of the early doll artists. They were actually UFDC members and doll makers who were collectors of antiques and were into that community, but they realized they wanted something different, I guess, in the ability to showcase their own specific doll art that they were creating. Helen Bullard was one of the first ones. She was the founder.
Hallie Blakely, Louise Cochran. There was about 10 of them.
Were the original pioneers and founders. Yeah. Dee-Wee's Cochran, I mean, you don't get a name any bigger than that. NIADA has really evolved over these years, and we now kind of understand the background. Tell us a little bit about the mission statement and the idea behind NIADA and what they're doing for doll artists.
I think that the mission statement is to have people recognize doll art as an art form. And that's pretty much the goal of it. Right now we have about 60 artist members. It's a very kind of stiff system to become a NIADA artist. You don't just walk in and say, "Hi, I've been making dolls." We have a standards committee. We invite artists to come to our conferences, which we hold every year, and have a critique with the NIADA artists, and then apply for membership. That's a 3-step process to become a member. They have to submit slides, which are viewed by a standards committee of 10 people. It used to be really difficult because we used to pass these portfolios around through the mail and, show slides at conference of the people that wanted to become members. And then you'd have these heavy portfolios that you'd have to mail around the country to every member on the standards committee to make comments. But that has evolved into now, with the internet, we can just send those online portfolios to our members and they can vote. And the voting system is kind of interesting. It's also one that was used by the American Craft Council. So when you're voting on something, 5 is the best and 1 is not very good, but there is no 3. So when you're voting, you really have to make a decision how to vote. No wishy-washy.
There's no average here. You're either bad or you're good. Okay.
Exactly.
Interesting concept. I guarantee you if I ever applied with anything I made, I would be the first 0 ever recorded in NIADA. But that's really interesting. I never understood that. They really are preserving legacies because they're not just featuring the artists of today. When you go to their website, which I've loved that website for years and how it showcases the different artists and the backgrounds. But that's what they are. They're preserving legacies. It's historical in context as well, going all the way back to Helen Bullard and Dee-Wee's Cochran and showcasing some of their work and remembering their contributions.
Yeah, we have quite an extensive archive. I was honored to go to Kansas City where they're stored and go through our archives because we were trying to organize them. In the beginning, these women made scrapbooks of the year of NIADA. Now it's mostly online and we have an online archive of people's work. But before that, it was these huge scrapbooks and letters. They saved everything. And if there was a program, they saved 10.
It is interesting looking at the archives through the years versus the current artists. And I've been really fascinated going onto the NIADA website. And I should say any listeners out there, it is NIADA, NIADA.org. And you can go to this and really study some of the evolutions of the artists through the years. The thing that really struck me, Stephanie, is that in the original origins of NIADA, the artists at that point were primarily focused on what I would call our traditional doll making. That is, a lot of it was either childhood connected, so they were making children, or some of them, like the great Dorothy Heiser, were making historical figures. And that was pretty much it. But it evolved. NIADA artists today are very different than the NIADA artists of the 1960s and early 70s, call it.
Yeah,
there was an evolution into fantasy and that type of thing.
And I often say that probably if those artists had applied today, a lot of them would not get in.
Oh, no. Okay.
One of the points that we look for besides, craftsmanship and design and creativity is that we look for an identity of style. As you know, I was helping Florence with identifying the dolls from the Richard Simmons collection. And a lot of them, I can just look at a doll and know that that artist is from Holland or the Netherlands, and that artist is from Russia. Not only is there an identity of an individual style, but there seems to be an identity by country. And maybe you could see a little bit of that in the antique dolls also.
Certainly you can. There are certain mediums, certain forms. I read an interesting article some years ago about, and this relates to music, not so much dolls, but it was an article about why in Seattle did the late 80s suddenly this great creative surge of music come out of there. And it was a lot of that there were all these artists huddled together in this one community, and they all started influencing each other into this one type of genre. And that gave that Seattle sound of the early 90s, like Nirvana and Pearl Jam. They were just all a community, a small, tight-knit community. So I can see that in doll art, a particular region, the doll artists and people who are creative in this field in that area are going to influence each other and create something that is similar. So that's really interesting. I never thought of that, but you're right. I look at a lot of the Russian artists for sure, and you can tell there is a certain style and a certain element that is particular to that region. And it could be cultural as well.
Right. I'm not sure what it is, but it's definitely there.
Really, really fascinating. Thank you for bringing that up because it's something I had never thought of before. Now, one of the things I've been really fascinated by, explain to me, is there a separation for NIADA or being defined as a contemporary doll artist? Is there sort of a separation between you are a doll artist or you are a commercial artist? Is there a difference?
We sort of say once you're voted in as a NIADA artist, you're always a NIADA artist, whether you're retired or whatever. But Robert Tonner and Helen Kish, they left because they were doing a lot more production. And I think NIADA is looking at one-of-a-kind dolls, like, there's only one of that doll.
That's the feeling I get, that it's not interested necessarily in promoting the idea of dolls that are designed by an artist, but then commercially produced in another country in quantities of thousands.
No, one of the things is that it has to be made by the artist.
Handmade by the artist. That, to me, is something that should be a big takeaway in understanding the organization, but understanding as well, Stephanie, these doll artists who are creating these sometimes one-of-a-kind pieces, how long does it take to make some of these dolls?
That's probably the one question that I'm asked the most is, how long does it take? Well, how long does it take? I mean, first of all, the idea runs around in your head. I mean, I've had ideas in my head for maybe 20 years that, eventually will become a reality. But you think about that. Or sculpting takes a long time. China painting, when I China paint a doll, I have to put it in and out of the kiln at least 4 times after it's expired. In order to fill a kiln, I don't just put one doll in, so I have to do several dolls. So it's very time consuming. If I was getting paid by the hour, I don't think, people would be able to afford what I do.
And that's what is remarkable to me. I know that there are contemporary doll artists that have sold some of their pieces for $10,000, one-of-a-kind items and upwards of that. And your first reaction is to think, wow, that's amazing. They got a lot of money for that piece. But in the realm of contemporary art, if you go to a gallery today of more traditional contemporary artists, not dolls,
right,
that's nothing. And the reality being that doll could have taken a year to make. Some of these really elaborate ones that I've seen, especially in Richard Simmons' collection that we'll talk about, I imagine that artist might have spent a year making that. My point being, it's a labor of love, isn't it?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I've been very fortunate that, I have made quite a lot of money over the years with my doll art. But when I was making a lot of money, I also had a little studio with employees. I had high school kids that were sitting and gluing on Swarovski crystals on all the teacup fairies.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So that worked for Kish. That worked for Tonner. That worked for me. But if you're doing what I do now, sitting alone in my studio and creating, if I had to make a living right now with the hours that I put in, I don't think I would be making a living.
Right. Because I'm looking at some of the artists like Lisa Lichtenfield, who I believe recently passed away. And I look at her work and I look at what she did in these one-of-a-kind dolls. And I don't think this was some amazing enterprise business that these doll artists were getting wealthy on. They were truly doing it because they loved it.
It was a passion and it's a labor of love. That's one thing about NIADA is that we're a family. We all sort of get each other. And when we get together at a conference every year, it's like getting together with your family at Thanksgiving, kind of.
Right. Because you're all passionate about the same thing and you all respect and know that you're doing this because you truly love it. You're not doing it because it's an entrepreneurial enterprise approach to a business that you think you're going to become wealthy on. You're doing it because you love it. And I think that's what NIADA is so great as an organization in supporting the purity of that idea and that concept, in that there is a certain level of integrity in this. And it's wonderful. Now, I guess I have one issue. And Stephanie, I'm curious your take on this. So I've been on this lecture tour around America and trying to bring an understanding that the narrative of dolls, the term dolls itself, I think is very much misunderstood, especially outside our world. That is who I like to call the others, the people that aren't the collectors necessarily, or people who are admiring these things in the same way we are. That the utilization of the term dolls misleads people. And it is especially so with your area in NIADA, in that I've been trying to promote the idea of utilizing the term of three-dimensional figural art. It is. And especially when you get into a lot of these contemporary artist dolls, and we talked about Lisa Lichtenfield's and looking at that, it's not a doll. It was not played with. It's not meant to be a plaything. It never was. Why are we calling them dolls still? What do you think about this? Your thoughts on it?
Well, when I'm in the doll world, I call my work dolls. And when I'm in the craft gallery kind of world, I call it mixed media figurative art. But NIADA uses the term dolls because that's what we've always used.
I would say that utilizing that term came out of the origins of NIADA, and that was, Helen Bullard, Dewey's Cochran. They were doll makers. They were making actual dolls. And so I can see the origins, but it seems we've evolved. And that's what I think it's helping us understand the evolution of this art as being more than just dolls.
Well, I think because of the use of textiles and hair, things like that, which you don't find on traditional figurative art, it takes it more into the realm of dolls than walking into a gallery and seeing a sculpted figure, but everything is sculpted, whereas we're sculpting with fabric and hair and other things.
It's an interesting conversation, and I think it's something that we're going to be discussing a lot in the future.
Yeah. I mean, we've had that conversation a lot within NIADA. For a long time, anthropomorphic dolls were not acceptable. And then we had somebody like Connie Smith, who makes wonderful anthropomorphic work. And she got accepted. I can't remember if she was our first anthropomorphic artist or not, but she'll make a lamb knitting, things like that, which would not have been accepted back in the early days.
Because it wasn't a doll.
Right. Mine are not necessarily dolls. My husband, who's an antique dealer, when he refers to my work, never refers to it as dolls because he thinks it takes people to a different headspace. He calls them Meissen-like figurines.
Okay. Figurines, figural art, figurative art. And it's what makes it so unique. It's three-dimensional, which a painting is not. You look at a painting, you see one part of a person if there's a portrait. And you don't see the back or the side or anything else. And that's what makes this so unique. Florence, my mother, gets upset at me when I use this term. She always says it's so hoity-toity, get over it. But I think when you're dealing with the others, it is a way to, as your husband says, get them into a better headspace and understanding what it really is that we're looking at here. I appreciate your insight into this. I know this is a rich conversation. We'll probably do a whole podcast on that alone. So contemporary artists, not doll artists, but traditional contemporary artists, are there any out there that have dabbled in making dolls that have caught your attention? Somebody that I have really been interested in that is not considered necessarily a doll artist, but more a contemporary doll artist. And I'm going to butcher this name. I know it, but Nicoletta Cuccelli,
right,
I believe, out of Italy. It's very interesting to me because I don't see her as a doll artist. And I don't believe she's part of NIADA, but she did appear in Richard Simmons' collection. And I saw the crossover and connection into that. This is a conventional contemporary artist who is doing, and she's done three-dimensional figures as well that might fit into the NIADA framework of understanding of a doll. And do you see this at all out there of other contemporary artists who are dabbling, shall we say?
Yeah, my friend who is a past president of NIADA, Tanya Marriott, who's from New Zealand, and she's a NIADA artist. She's in the pop art movement, and she collects a lot of those pop artists, and a lot of them would be considered dolls. So I don't know whether Nicoletta has made dolls or not, but there's a lot of those people that are in that pop art movement that make figurative sculptures that could be considered dolls. This is the younger generation.
Yeah, that's what I'm really fascinated by, is that there seems to be a movement in contemporary artists today that are recognizing that figural art or dolls have a place in the conversation of more traditional, I can't say traditional contemporary art,
right,
but just contemporary art in general, that there is a place for it. So as we watch things evolve, this is going to be fascinating over these next 20, 30 years as this grows. But the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, this was like a 25-year, would you dare call it golden age of doll art that took place?
Something like that. We call it the heyday or something,
the heyday, okay. But it seemed like artists were sprouting all over the world, really pushing the boundaries of getting away from that old school days of NIADA and really coming up with concepts and visions of doll art that no one had ever experimented with before. What do you think? What created this moment or this movement of that time period?
Well, I think that the people that were buying these dolls and making these dolls, it was a time maybe when there was more money and people were into collecting. I think that my whole generation is a generation of collectors. It just seemed like it was a moment in time when everything sort of came together, and it was like an explosion, and I was definitely part of it.
Do you think it was that there were so many, shall we call them, patrons of the art at that point?
Well, there were, NIADA has 3 different membership levels. You have artists, patrons, and associates. And at that time, NIADA had all these people that were patrons, and they would put on our conferences. We would just have to walk in, and they would do everything. We no longer have that wonderful luxury. But
right.
Richard Simmons was a wonderful patron, and there are lots of others. Some of them still are around, but we lost a lot of them over the years.
I can't put my finger on it, what happened at that point and how it developed, but it really is fascinating. And I noticed, too, as well, over the years, there was crossover between what I would call classic collectors of antique dolls and vintage things who would buy contemporary art dolls, maybe one-of-a-kinds. But there were a lot of collectors, like Richard Simmons, who did not collect anything but contemporary art dolls. And I've been in a lot of homes where there were collectors. No, I don't even want to call them collectors. They were patrons, but they were very happy with owning 10 very high-end, one-of-a-kind contemporary art dolls. And I don't know if you would call them collectors, because you look at like people who buy contemporary art today, not all of them are collectors. They may want to buy 5 or 10 pieces to have as decorative items to hang on their wall, whatever. And so you see that there's very few people who are buying antique dolls as I just want 5 or 6 as a decorative object. You're kind of a collector or you're not. But with your area of contemporary art dolls, you'll see people who will just buy them as a decorative piece.
Yes, like my Kiss couple. I've made maybe 10 or 12 different versions of that, different styles and periods, and I have sold them to people that have never bought a doll and won't buy another one, but they just bought it to decorate their house or whatever.
It's a sculpture. It's a three-dimensional sculpture. It's a decorative piece. And that's where I think you, NIADA, and the contemporary doll artists really do cross into another level of patrons that are not necessarily collectors in the classic sense, but buy them as a piece of contemporary art. So that's a very distinguishing moment here in understanding the two different worlds. So what's interesting, because you just touched on this, Stephanie, so it was a perfect segue into this next question of your insights and your thought process. That golden age, that 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, a lot of these people who are buying these pieces, and Richard Simmons is a great example, who built interesting collections of them, they're starting to pass away. And you just touched on that earlier and mentioned it. And as such, we are approaching now a very interesting moment in seeing a lot of these dolls that did push boundaries during that time, that they are coming up on a secondary market for the very first time. What are your thoughts on this as you see these begin to come up in an auction environment? And contemporary art in general comes up in secondary markets all the time. You see large, major contemporary art auctions in New York and London, all over. So this is very normal, and it seems a natural progression, but this is the first time. What are your thoughts as an artist about this and seeing this?
I think traditionally, a lot of artists don't get recognized monetarily during their lifetime, but then once they're gone, their work sells for a lot of money. I've also seen that in the art doll world, that things have more value if the artist isn't alive, unfortunately. Yeah. And it'll be interesting to watch Richard's collection, because some of those artists that did command high prices when they were alive are now no longer with us, like E.J. Taylor and Lisa Lichtenfeld. So it'll be interesting to see how their prices soar. And then it's also interesting to see in Richard's collection that someone like Forrest Rogers, who was a NIADA artist, but now has gone on and is much more recognized in that sort of pop culture world rather than the doll world. And there's some of her early work in Richard Simmons' collection. Oftentimes, I've taken my work from, if friends have passed away, I've sold my work that they had in their collections for people because I can get more money for it, because I created it rather than if it went on eBay, for instance.
And that's interesting in itself, is that part of the attraction of collecting these, and we saw this with Richard Simmons, who we'll talk about in a few minutes, was the relationships they developed with the artist and being able to buy them directly from the artist. And that was a very attractive part of the process. But clearly, you mentioned before, artists pass away, and eventually they're going to reach another level of secondary markets and how they're presented. I agree, just somebody randomly selling something on some internet portal may not be the best way to feature it. But if we start seeing these promoted larger scale auctions, this could be a development of a secondary market that is robust and will actually begin to grow the concept of contemporary doll artists. It will promote them more, because it was very insular, artist to collector or artist to patron, and it didn't have a whole lot of promotion out there to the general public. And this is an opportunity. If we look at Dorothy Heiser, I think is a perfect example. I think we're going to see great things over time. It will take time to develop, but you will see great things begin to mature in the understanding of secondary. Because look at Dorothy Heiser's dolls, what they're bringing now.
Right. Yes.
One of the early NIADA artists, what they weren't selling for that back then. Now we can have Dorothy Heiser's bringing $10,000 to $15,000 in some cases. So I think this is a good sign, a really good thing that's happening in seeing the secondary market.
Right, and exposing it to a larger audience, too.
That's the whole, I think, going to be the coming out moment of people understanding that there were some really creative, talented people making these three-dimensional figural pieces during that golden age. And they're just now going to really be discovered by a whole new generation. And it's going to be through the auctions, which kind of leads us to Richard Simmons.
Okay.
So let's talk about your friend Richard Simmons, because you knew him well. Now, I want to start off here, Stephanie, to steal a little bit of the thunder in that we have a fairly broad international audience here, and there's a lot of people outside of the U.S. who have never heard of Richard Simmons. I was at a dinner with about 8 German collectors last night, and I mentioned this, and they're like, who is that? And I'm like, how could you not know who Richard Simmons is? But it's true. Once you get out of the U.S., it's not as widely known. So let me just tell you that just very quickly. Richard Simmons was a defining, iconic figure of the 1980s and 1990s in America. I mean, if you go and watch any TV show that recounts a decade of the 80s and all the pop culture popular things of that time, inevitably, you're going to see a whole segment on Richard Simmons and what he did. He was a fitness guru, a fitness leader who saw an opportunity in that fitness trainers and all of the videos and all the gyms and everything out there seemed to be geared towards people who are already fit, and that people who had weight problems or whatever, that they didn't feel comfortable in that environment. He wanted to make them feel that way. And so he began developing videos that helped people to understand and see it was okay to be not in the best physical condition or shape, but to still be able to exercise and do your best. And he was this amazing positive voice, positive leader, and had this wild personality, and is well known for dressing in these crazy tank tops and short shorts.
Don't forget the rhinestones.
And the rhinestones, exactly. He made people feel good, a whole generation. And his videos, Sweating with the Oldies. By the way, Stephanie, I always said, if only he collected antique dolls, when we sold his collection, it could have been called Sweating with the Oldies, because it would have been antiques. So,
right.
But that's a little background on Richard Simmons. And, you know, if you go back to the 80s and 90s in American pop culture, he is a huge part of it. But Stephanie, you knew the man and you spent a lot of time with him. Give us your thoughts on who Richard was, who has recently passed away a little over a year ago. So for this new generation, they may not know him. Tell them your thoughts on Richard Simmons.
He was an actor in a lot of ways. I mean, he had a persona that he developed, and that was his outside persona. But he was a really generous and caring person who discovered doll art and made us all his friends. He took us on a cruise to Luz. I recently posted a photograph on my Facebook page from that. It was amazing to watch him in his world.
Tell us what a cruise to Luz is.
Okay, a cruise to Luz is where all these women, I mean, he has a following. He has like an entourage. So a cruise to Luz was that you signed up for a cruise and you spent maybe a week on the water in a cruise ship. And, you know, cruises are notorious for food. So here's all these women that are trying to lose weight and follow Richard's thing, surrounded by food. So that was kind of interesting. He would give educational lectures during the cruise, and for breakfast you would get up and exercise with Richard. And the most amazing thing to watch was after he did the exercise thing, these people would line up and Richard would sit there and talk to each one of them and hold their hand. And he was just amazing to watch, his caring for these people on the cruise. And he wanted all of his doll artists that he invited, he wanted to share his world with us. He had a pajama party one night. This was on the cruise. We all had to come in our pajamas and talk about our work to these women.
So interesting. I never met him, never had the pleasure to meet him, but I saw the persona Richard Simmons, you know, on the stage and on talk shows and TV. And, you know, he was funny. He was uplifting and full of energy. He was amazing. But you're telling me that other part of him that I think a lot of people didn't really see maybe up close as much as you did, but he was deeply caring and sensitive as well.
he would call me and we would have these long conversations. I mean, I think, in a way, I think a lot of celebrities kind of experience that. They have that outward persona, but then if you get close to them, there's another part of them that also needs nurturing.
Right. It's nice to get a little insight into him and the man, because I'm amazed by him. And when I went to his house to see his collection and had the first exposure, I was truly astounded. And it actually, for me, developed a better understanding of contemporary doll art and what he was really focused on in his collecting.
He lived with his dolls. I mean,
yes,
they were
that's what I was going to say.
They were in every room of his house. It wasn't like a doll room.
But they weren't in every room of his house in a way that was looking like a collection. No. Yeah, overwhelming. They were decorative in every placement throughout the house. I had never seen anything like this, and it helped me to understand how you could create decorative approaches to your collection with contemporary art. His family, I sat with his brother, and who told me that he always said that I want to have a seat in every room in the house, no matter where I am, that I will be able to see a doll in my line of vision. But it wasn't like they were piled there, all up or just thrown around. They were beautifully displayed on pedestals, in cases, in really tastefully done. It felt like part of his home.
When somebody said, my doll is in Richard's bathroom, well, if you saw Richard's bathroom.
Well, that was not just any old bathroom, exactly.
No.
Yes. It was more like a spa, let's call it. Okay. So, but that was the thing that really struck me, was he had incredible taste, amazing taste in the way he presented it.
He studied art, I think.
Okay.
And,
I didn't realize that.
He was in a Fellini movie.
Really?
Uh-huh. He spent a year in Rome, I believe, studying art.
Well, then that might explain some of it.
Yeah, so he did have somewhat of an art background. One of the things I wanted to mention was that I wasn't just his friend. I mean, he became friends with all these artists. They all knew him and they all loved him. He did have more of a special relationship with some of us, but each one of them he spent time with and talked to and asked them to make dolls. And he had a personal relationship with most of the artists.
I know he did. And we mentioned Lisa before and a number of these artists that he was close to, talked to quite a bit. And so let me ask you this. This is really interesting. Do you think, because we touched on it earlier, that 80s, 90s, early 2000s golden age, it directly parallels the Richard Simmons period of collecting? Do you think he was the quintessential muse that created this incredible golden age, or inspired it, let's say?
Possibly. I have a lot of Hollywood collectors. They all sort of appeared around that same period of time. I think it was just something in the air that attracted these people to art dolls. Yes, he was responsible for a lot of artists upping their game and becoming more well-known and professional. I think he certainly added to their public persona, perhaps, that they were in his collection. And then, of course, he started a company to mass produce dolls.
But it seems to me that he also was challenging some artists to go outside their comfort zone in some ways. Didn't he have specially commissioned dolls? He would come with an idea to the artist and say, I really want this.
Yeah, like he wanted one of my Kiss couples, and he wanted it to be all in white, and he wanted it to be Russian. I'm not sure why. Maybe he had other dolls that were dressed in white that he wanted to group them with. The Barbra Streisand doll that's in the collection, I believe he commissioned Lisa to do that doll for him.
Right. And that's one that's a great example, because I don't see her necessarily making a portrait of Barbra Streisand. No. He clearly commissioned that. So he was influential in certainly, I think, pushing boundaries, and certainly with his special commissions, giving artists challenges they never would have done before. Right. So, and you see it with his collection. You've had a chance now, because this podcast is being recorded a week before the auction in which his collection will be sold. If you're listening to it after, you can go online and still look at the archives of it and be able to kind of see this whole vision laid out before you in catalog form. When you look at this collection now, you look at all of these dolls laid out in a way that I don't think you've even ever seen before at its total fruition, at its completion. What do you see, Stephanie, in his vision? What do you see from one doll to the next? Because there's so many different types of things.
I know. It's really a variety of work. I mean, it's anything from tiny babies to large Barbra Streisand doll.
Right. And the old people. He loved old people.
Oh, gosh. Annie Wall. He and Annie probably had the closest relationship. And all those old people are by Annie Wall. And together they developed a lot of dolls of old people and old people in different ways. I love her church ladies and her gossip ladies, and they're just wonderful.
But it extends. There's fantasy figures, there's historical figures, there's old people we mentioned, there's babies, there's portraits of African American life in America. Just it's so broad.
I think Richard loved people, and he was able to have all those different varieties of people in his life with all these dolls. The whole collection just shows you all the aspects of personalities of people.
And he knew a lot of people, but when he went home, these became his people.
Right.
It's so interesting to me because this collection has fascinated me since the moment I walked in because it was so different than any other collection I've ever seen. So, Stephanie, what do you think now with this auction, because this is probably the biggest profile auction event ever to feature contemporary art dolls of that golden age. And with Richard's name behind it, what do you feel about this now? Do you think this will really help to open doors to people that are respecting and understanding this creative?
Well, let's hope so. I'm excited to watch it and to participate in it and see where it goes because, yes, it will be the first time that such a large collection of art dolls has been put out there in such a nice environment and beautiful way. The catalog is lovely, as all your catalogs are. I'm looking forward to it.
You knew Richard well. What do you think he would make of all this?
I think he would love it. He would love it.
He would love the pageantry of it all, let's say.
I think so, yeah. I mean, it spotlights him. It spotlights his collection. These were all things that he handpicked. He didn't just order them from a catalog or whatever. He met the artists and worked with them. I think he would like to see them all have a good home.
I guess that leads out of Richard a little bit to ask this question then. As we step into this next generation, away from that golden age and the period where Richard Simmons was one of the most important patrons of that time and was so enthusiastic, and I should say too as well, he just wasn't a private collector. He took dolls on TV shows often and went out there with them to display his passion and talked about, I love dolls. I love these and I love these artists. And he would give so much promotion to the hobby and gave validation to it in a lot of ways.
You know, some of his women that commissioned me after we did that Cruise to Lose. So, I mean, he expanded the collecting world, and it'll be interesting to see how many of his followers, come to the auction. I had a couple comments from some of them on my Facebook page about how much Richard loved all his doll artists and everything. So
the auction will be a moment a little bit, I think, here for him to have one more salute to the artists he loved during that time. Yeah.
And I think he would love that they're being passed on.
I think every collector does. And we are never the owners of the objects. We're the caretakers.
Right.
And
yes.
And I think what will be important in this, and Richard would love this more than anything, is that the legacy of his ownership and his attachment to these dolls is passed on to future generations because it tells a lot of his story and it shows us a different side of him.
It does.
Yeah.
Yes.
So with that, going forward in the future, as this auction really, I think, becomes a turning point and a chance to broaden the market, broaden people's understanding, and grow the appreciation of three-dimensional figural art. There, I'm going to say it.
Okay.
Where do you see the future going in this particular genre, both from an artist perspective and a collector perspective?
Well, I think hopefully we'll get a surge. We need more younger people, and this is all over, but we need to get more younger people involved in creating and collecting these works. A lot of the artists are either no longer with us or aging out, like me. I mean, I'm still making dolls. I'll probably make dolls to the day I die, just because that's what I do.
You do it, Stephanie. Go all the way.
Of course, I've told my friends, if if my dolls ever start looking like this, would you please tell me?
Are there artists coming out of new areas that you're seeing that are pushing the boundaries?
NIADA used to be an American-only organization, and we've started taking in artists from around the world. The Eastern European countries, doll art there seems to be thriving. I went to Doll Prague, which is held every year in Prague, and it's huge. We have a big display at Doll Prague, and our current president is Ukrainian.
Yeah, that's where I've been seeing tremendous work, like incredible.
Yeah.
They are pushing boundaries. You may not know this. I went to the Moscow Doll Expo in 2019. I got to meet a lot of these artists and was just astounded how many there were, astounded at the things they were creating. And they were both Ukrainian and Russian and Eastern European, all there.
And the crowds that they draw,
Stephanie,
amazing.
There was like 25,000 people came through in a 2-day period. I was like, this is not like American doll shows.
No,
it was incredible to see.
Yep.
So it is an area where I think this will be stimulating new creatives and, as I say, pushing boundaries a little bit, and is a hope as well for the future of this art. So, you touched on younger people, and I think from the artist standpoint, it would be very good to begin training and identifying and finding young people in the creative part. As far as collecting goes, people collect typically when they're older. So that will come around. And you can listen to one of my podcasts about the next great generation of collectors. And it's actually millennials are identifying with collecting far more than, say, Gen X. So I have great hopes for your future in this. And definitely NIADA is going to be a big part of this.
We do critiques at Doll Prague. We have enough NIADA artists that go to Doll Prague, and artists from that part of the world can ask for a critique. And there's a lot of mentorship behind the scenes of helping artists to become more recognizable. I find that when a person starts making art dolls in the beginning, they copy people. And I guess that's sort of typical of any art form. You start off by copying, and then as you develop your style, hopefully you can create your own identity and become your own person and not a carbon copy of somebody else's doll. NIADA tries to help upcoming artists. We have an academy that has over 70 different classes that are online. We're really looking to help artists realize their full potential.
Just want to make sure I understand this. If you're a collector, you can still join NIADA as a patron?
Yes, as a patron. And also we have a category called associates. For a long time, visiting artists or artists that wanted to become a NIADA artist, the only category that they could have become is a patron, and they really weren't patrons, but they couldn't call themselves NIADA artists because they hadn't been through the whole process. So we created a category called associates, which is artists that want to come and be at NIADA and learn from NIADA artists and have critiques and
developing artists.
Yes, developing artists.
Yeah. It's a wonderful organization. Stephanie, you are an amazing person. I've been honored to know you all these years, and you were a big part of helping Florence with the cataloging of a lot of these pieces, because some of these artists didn't sign their things. And so having to identify them, you were working hours with Florence behind the scenes. And this is very important to make sure that the legacy, not only Richard's legacy of what he collected, but the legacy of those artists and what they created was properly documented. And you were fantastic at this.
Still few mystery. There's still mysteries out there, but
It's been a bit of crowdsourcing, I would say. We've been getting emails. Some of them are, I created this doll.
Right.
So we're like, oh, well, that's great. And so we're able to add information as we go, which is wonderful, because we want to be able to document not only Richard Simmons' legacy and his greatness as a human being and as a collector, but to make sure that the artists are recognized and properly credited throughout. But Stephanie, you are fantastic. You have a website, stephanieblythe.com. People can order your dolls, but there's wonderful videos in there that talk about your process as well, that some might enjoy watching to learn what goes into making these dolls and as you said, not just the figures themselves, but the textiles. So I hope people will go visit your website and you can still order things. As Stephanie said, she'll keep going as long as people order them. So keep ordering. And for patrons and collectors and people interested in becoming doll artists, if you're young in your 20s and 30s and you're listening to this podcast and you have dabbled in doll making or really aspire and would love to learn more about it, or have come out of art school and are looking for something new, an angle to approach in your work, NIADA is a great place to start. And you can find them at NIADA.org, NIADA.org, and get in and support this organization. They are fantastic, and they are doing so much for continuing the legacy of former artists and promoting the development of new ones. So, Stephanie, thanks.
Appreciate your inviting me to do this.
Well, I appreciate your coming on here. It's been a really interesting look at this other world, and especially for collectors of antique dolls who really may not know it, it's a great opportunity. So thanks, Stephanie. Thanks, everyone, for being here at The Curious Collector.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of The Curious Collector. The Curious Collector is hosted by Stuart Holbrook and produced by Tammy Trujillo. We invite you to follow us on social media and feel free to leave any questions you have for Stuart on Facebook at Stuart Holbrook-Theriault or follow the Theriault Company Facebook page. And you can stay up to date with the latest auctions and events at Theriaults.com. We'll talk to you on the next episode of The Curious Collector.